Today we're talking about how the scientific method can help you become a better practicer. Welcome. Welcome to the studio. My name is Cassie and I'm a professional violist and teaching artist. Notice I didn't say I was a scientist, but I think the scientific method can really help us become better practicers. So there are 6 steps to the scientific method, and we're going to see how those can help us in the practice room. The piece I'm using for this today is the first movement of Bach's very first cello suite in G major, but you can apply this to whatever piece or etude or scale you're working on. So the very first step of the scientific method is observation. We're going to observe our own playing. Now, this can come in many forms. You can just do it as you're playing, you're listening through when you're practicing and you're observing what's going on, what's going well, what's not going well. Or you can record yourself either with a video or audio. If you've never done this before, especially with audio, it can be really painful. So just know that it's painful for all of us. When I watch these videos back, it's painful for me sometimes, but it's going to help us make progress, and that's what we're all about here. So I'm going to take that very first movement of the suite, and I'm just going to make some observations. I'll play a few measures, and I'll speak out loud what I observed. So I made a few observations actually. My first observation was that on my slurred notes, it's always 3 slurs, right? 1, 2, 3. The very start of my slur was not always consistent. It wasn't how I wanted it to sound. So I need to make sure that in the next step of the scientific method, I'm doing something that can help me to make that better. I also noticed that the dynamics that I wanted to create, I wanted to do more, less, more, echo, more, less. I can always exaggerate those dynamics. What I'm hearing under my ear is not necessarily what the audience is hearing, and I know that. You should know that too as a violist. So I want to make sure that I'm exaggerating those dynamics. So those are 2 of my big observations. There's a billion other things that I could fix, but those are the 2 that I want to work on right now. So once I've had my observations, the next step is to research. For scientists, this is a different thing, right? You could look at past studies, you could look at data. For us, maybe research means I'm going to go onto YouTube and look or watch or listen to a bunch of different recordings of this piece. That counts as research because maybe they're doing something with the bowing or the phrasing that I hadn't thought of before, and maybe I want to try to implement that. So research for us looks a little bit different. Research could also be going to your teacher and asking them, hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z and it's not working. What would you suggest? So that counts as research too. Asking a teacher, asking a friend, asking a fellow musician. So let's just assume I've been on YouTube or I've gone onto Spotify or whatever your music platform is, and I've listened to a bunch of different recordings. And I noticed that not everybody does this bowing. 3 slurred and the rest separate. Some people slur 4. Some people don't slur anything. Etc. There's a million different ways to bow this. So part of our research, because I am working on a piece where there is so much literature written about it, is maybe going to a source that is not the source that I'm playing from. What I mean by that is there's a lot of free and not edited editions of this piece, and not all of them are scholarly. So for this particular piece, I know we have 5 different versions of the cello suites that were kind of compiled, and we think this is our best guess at what Bach would have wanted. It's not an autographed manuscript like we have for the violin sonatas and partitas. So this is our best guess at what we think Bach would have said is, the ultimate final copy. So in part of that research, I might look at a scholarly edition. The edition that I use is this one, and I'll post a link to that in the description. And this one is a scholarly edition. It's not something that you found on MuseScore. It's not something that maybe was an IMSLP that was edited by somebody that didn't have a historical perspective. So what I really love about this Peters edition is that it gives you a lot of information at the front of the book about the 5 sources that were used and where they came up with their ideas, and they make footnotes in it. So it's a more scholarly edition, and that counts as that second level of the scientific method of research. Once we've done our research, we're going to go back and we're going to apply some of that. So let's say The original bowing that I was doing, which is the bowing that is actually printed in this edition, I don't really like it, and I want to slur 4 at a time. So I'm going to practice that. More, less. And then we start again at step 1, which is that observation. So now I've switched something, I've changed my experiment. I'm going to go back and say either those 4 slurs worked, I like them better, or I got to change something else because I tried it, I didn't like it. So we would repeat those steps: observation, research. Our next step is our hypothesis. So my hypothesis is if I slur 3 notes and separate, it might be a little bit more historically accurate. So I'm going to go with that. My hypothesis is that the bowing that is printed in the part is the one I want to use. You can see how this can help you, right? So once you've formulated your hypothesis, you go back and you test it. So whatever that is for the piece you're working on, that's your next step. The next step, step 4, is experimentation. We just talked about my hypothesis is if I do the historical bowing, or the what we think is the historical bowing, it will be a little bit more true to the phrasing and the spirit of the piece. So I would have to practice to kind of make that happen or bring that into life. If I'm practicing it and it's just really not working for me, I'm going to go back to step 1 and I'm going to try something new. So there's never an interpretation that's ever set in stone. I've worked on the Bach cello suites probably for close to 25 years at this point. And every time I teach it, every time I play it, I do it a little bit differently because I'm a different person coming to the piece. Maybe I've learned something new. So that's why the scientific method, it's flexible, right? If you learn something new, you bring it and you apply it to the piece that you're working on. So after experimentation, we're going to go to analysis. This is kind of like observation. It's like that first step that we did. I'm going to record myself. Maybe I tried the 4-note slur. And I want to know what it sounds like. What's my analysis? I would either, visually record myself or just orally record myself. And I'm going to see, did my experiment work? Was my hypothesis true or not? Does 4-note slurred actually sound better and more true to the music than 3-note slurred does? And if it doesn't, we got to go back to the drawing board. Our final step is the conclusion. Now, eventually you're going to have to perform whatever piece you're working on. So you're going to have to come to a conclusion that says, yes, I'm going to do this bowing here. I'm going to select this dynamic. I'm going to select this phrasing. And again, it doesn't have to be set in stone. That's the great thing about the scientific method. You might hear something or see somebody play it a different way, and it kind of changes your interpretation. And you go back to your own practice and you try to implement that. So while practice can often seem monotonous and it can sometimes feel fruitless, like I've practiced for 2 hours and I don't feel like I made any progress, I think sometimes being able to apply the scientific method can give us some concrete steps to feel like we've made progress that day. So whatever piece you're working on, see if that scientific method or thinking like a scientist works for you. To kind of simplify that even in a way, if you're working on a difficult passage and you've always struggled with that passage, if you're a scientist and you're running the same experiment and you're getting the same outcome each time, what are you doing? You're wasting your money, you're wasting your time, right? We know that science has to be replicable. In practice, I have to be able to replicate something. And if all I'm replicating is frustration and struggle, I got to change my experiment. So let's say with the same piece, I want to do 3 notes per bow. And this is always what happens, right? This is not what I want. This is not my final outcome. My separate notes are just not sounding how I want them to. But I'm going to practice it the same exact way for the next 30 minutes. Is that a good use of my time? Nah, I got to run a different experiment. Okay, so let me try it the way I was doing it again just to observe what's happening. Okay, I observed that I'm using way too much bow on the separate notes. So let me run a different experiment. I'm going to see how little bow I can use. I'm going to do the exact opposite and see if that fixes anything for me. I mean, it kind of fixed some things, but then I ran into trouble because the slurs were not in the part of the bow that I wanted them to be in. So maybe the happy medium is that instead of using as little bow as possible or just kind of letting myself go wild, I try to tame myself and use a medium amount of bow on those separate notes. Okay, I ran that experiment and I kind of liked how it sounded. So I got to be able to replicate that. Maybe let me make a note in my music, use medium amount of bow, whatever that is. You got to write down your observations too, like any good scientist, because what if you come back to your piece tomorrow and you practice it how you wanted it, but then you forget what you did? So writing down stuff in your music is totally helpful. Again, that's what a scientist would do. So I hope this maybe presented a different way for you to practice. Again, we have to practice, right? Like, it's the means to the end. But I think if you think of it a little bit more like you're a scientist and you're really just going into the practice room to experiment, it can make things a little bit more fun for you. So let me know if this was useful for you, or if you've actually heard somebody say or like suggest to you that you practice in this way before, and if it was helpful, what was not helpful, if you're further down the road than some of us who are maybe just starting with the scientific method, what's been useful for you. So until the next video, thank you so much for joining me, and happy practicing, scientists.